Treasure Planet is one of the most baller movies Disney has ever created. Despite its mixed at the time critical reception and its notorious box office failure, in the 24 years since its release, it's gained somewhat of a cult following. It had a special sauce to it that another box office flop Disney adventure movie about daddy issues couldn't capture, with the film in question being Strange World.
That ain't good.
But there's one scene in particular that a lot of people look back at fondly that encapsulates what makes Treasure Planet great and fully made me realize just how big the quality gap is between these two films, despite them aiming to do similar things. Today we'll take a look at that scene, as well as a similar one from Strange World that, in my opinion, doesn't stick the landing the same way the former did, alongside observations regarding other key moments / supporting characters from both films that strengthen the arguments being made throughout the video. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to another quick joint, just barely. A series where a video is too long to be used, too short, but too short to be a full-length video. Let's actually talk about these movies now, starting with Treasure Planet. If you clicked on this video, chances are you already know what this movie is about, so I won't beat you over the head with too much plot summary before the initial scene analysis, but here's a quick rundown of aspects of this film that contextualize this theme we're going to talk about. After Jim joins the crew for his voyage to find his world's greatest treasure, he becomes close with a man named Silver, who builds a father-like bond with Jim despite the former's underlying nefarious intentions. The dilemma Silver faces, genuinely wanting to be a positive influence for Jim and being a cold-hearted criminal, is one of the main things that drives not just the emotional core of the film itself, but also the specific scene that I wanted to talk about today. Said scene takes place after a black hole nears the ship. One of their crew members named Arrow ends up getting killed by this chopped-ass nigga right here, but since it happens without the rest of the crew knowing, Jim blames himself for what happened, since he was the one who oversaw securing the lifelines. In the aftermath of all this, Jim sits in despair, filled with regret for something that really isn't even his fault.
It wasn't your fault, you know.
Silver looks unbothered and relaxed at first, but as soon as he sees Jim feeling down, he nonchalantly tries to cheer him up. As he tries to elaborate further on why Jim should forgive himself, Jim cuts him off as he monologues his feelings.
No, look, don't you get it? I screwed up. I mean, for 2 seconds, I thought that maybe I could do something right, but...
As soon as Jim does this, you can see that Silver's facial expression changes. Fully seeing Jim express his emotions makes his expression start to mirror the same ones Jim is feeling in that moment. The droopiness of Silver's facial structure makes his design loose enough to where his expressions bounce off the screen, which in turn allows the audience to live vicariously through him in those moments. So when he stops to try to reassure Jim nonchalantly by choosing to fully express the potential and admiration he has for him, it doesn't come as a surprise. For a good chunk of the movie up until this point, we see him wrestling with the idea of being a father figure for Jim and molding him into an even stronger person. But there's always hesitation within him, whether it's visually or through dialogue. But in this moment, he finally chooses to embrace this role, since he could sense that it was what Jim needed without him having to communicate it verbally. Instead of a moment like this feeling like a mandated emotional story beat, it feels human because of the amount of subtle and overt buildup that the movie has given to this moment. One of the primary reasons that's the case is because this scene was loosely based off a moment from John Musker, co-director / writer for the film's real life.
If there was ever a sequence that I would love to go and keep trying to make it to reach its potential, it's the sequence, because it's so deep, and the emotions that I felt with this were so much tied into my own history. And what happened to me is when I was 18 years old, and my football coach comforted me in the parking lot one night after a football game where I completely lost the starting position and I felt unjustly treated, and he came out and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Glenn, you're going to do great things. I'm going to be there when you're making that touchdown." And I mean, he had tears in his eyes and I had tears in my eyes, and looked a lot like Long John Silver. It was one of those soul inspirations for me in this character. And when you're drawing on an emotion like that, that's so real, you're setting yourself up for a fall. You're never going to be able to capture how you felt. And I think we both probably animated every scene in this at least 2 or 3 times.
Earlier in the movie, when we saw Silver advise his sidekick Mort to keep an eye on Jim and make sure he doesn't find out anything he's not supposed to. Initially, he said this just to make sure his plan of infiltrating the ship later in the movie didn't fall through. But after he builds an emotional bond with Jim, we can see him still keeping that same goal of not letting Jim find out the truth, but for slightly different reasons. He's trying to keep his true intentions separate from him, not only for Jim's sake, but for his as well, because he felt like it'll harden the blow if Jim finds out the truth before he's supposed to. This is why he pulls away from Jim's hug the way he does. He has to snap himself back into place and remember the mission. So him having the most loose, fluid animation out of any character in the film illustrates his body language in that moment perfectly. Speaking of this animation, they use some pretty cool proprietary technology in order to bring Silver to life. But hey, if you've been enjoying hearing me over explain this 24-year-old movie so far, make sure to like and subscribe. We get real passionate about shit over here, man. It's good vibes. But anyway, an in-house software called Deep Canvas that was initially created for the movie Tarzan, released 3 years prior to Treasure Planet, was used for the latter to create 360 CG environments that surround traditionally animated characters. But in its best usage within the film, it strengthens the overall expressiveness and fluidity of its hand-drawn characters instead of distracting from it. It becomes an aid to the movie's visual world instead of diluting it. One of the best examples of that is Silver's CG arm. Despite the movie's Deep Canvas work looking dated at times, Silver's cyborg arm never falls short visually, even though it's attached to a 2D character. Although this character not looking visually believable to the audience was a worry for the crew working on it.
Silver is a very unique character in that he's the first time we've animated a character that's traditional hand-drawn and computer-generated in the same character. And we really wondered, is the audience going to believe this character is real? Is it going to look like he's got metal pieces stuck onto him and they don't belong, they're not part of his being? Are they going to buy it? And I was very happy to find that the biggest challenges with Silver were not the technical sticking a CG part onto him, but as it should be, it was the acting, the performance. That how do you make him real?
Getting in too deep here, Murphy. Next thing you know, they'll be saying I've gone soft.
Even though this movie wasn't a financial success, its behind-the-scenes production is fairly well documented. Its entire 91-minute DVD audio commentary is actually available right here on YouTube, and although I only used a small portion of it within this analysis, it brought a tremendous amount of value not just to this video, but also to me as a fan of the film. If you're interested, the extensive notes that I took while listening to that audio commentary that mostly couldn't be used for this video are available right now on my Patreon, link in the description. Now that all of that is out of the way, remember how I said Strange World had an emotional scene similar to this one that didn't stick the landing nearly as hard as Treasure Planet's? Well, let's finally get into that, shall we? The basic rundown of the movie's plot is our main protagonist, Searcher, being ostracized by his father, Jaeger. No, not that one. For 25 years for not wanting to be an adventurer. After all this time has passed, he finds out one of his father's old crew members needs his planting expertise, something that his dad never appreciated, in order to save the planet. Since the plant that he discovered, which is called Pando, is starting to be more harmful than expected, and he's the only one who could change that. After a sequence of events, Searcher happens to run into his father after all this time. They start to clash with each other after Jaeger develops a close relationship with Ethan, since it reinforces the fear he has of his son wanting to become an adventurer like Jaeger and abandoning him. But once team up to fight off a group of extraterrestrial beings trying to attack their ship, things start to calm down between them, at least for the time being. They even end up having a short heart-to-heart moment, which is the main scene from the film we'll be analyzing today. As they sit on the balcony sharing a couple of cold brewskis, Jaeger asks Searcher why he enjoys farming so much, finally deciding to try and understand what makes his son unique as a person 25 years after abandoning him, and almost an hour into a 90-minute movie. Great parenting, right guys? But anyway, Searcher explains to his father that the reason he loves farming is because of the long-lasting purpose as well as the overall legacy of what he's doing, therefore hoping that it'll inspire his son to do the same. This leads to Jaeger being fully honest about why he never came back home, but this part specifically is the main issue I have with the scene as well as the dynamic between these two overall. How soft-spoken and regretful his voice is in the scene is definitely one of the biggest voice acting highlights within this film, so I will give the movie credit for that. But at the same time, even though this is supposed to be a touching moment, unlike the heart-to-heart moments we saw between Jim and Silver in Treasure Planet, it's hard for me to completely take this seriously. In so many words, the scene basically goes like this. You know why I didn't come home for 25 years, son? Why, Pop? Because I was afraid of my own legacy. No, bro, no way. No one would have ever guessed that. I wouldn't have crossed anyone's minds. No way, bro. You're telling me a man who abandoned his family for 2.5 decades so that he could treat his life like a Tomb Raider level was only thinking about himself the whole time? And on top of that, he didn't even try to be vulnerable with his own son or take his ambition seriously until after he realized he could join the mission for the sake of his own goals as an explorer? The fact that it took him so far into the movie to realize the error of his ways, on top of never getting any deeper insight into why he wanted to hold on to being an explorer in the first place, beyond being used to it as a part of his identity is crazy. Like, you're telling me there wasn't even at least one thing that happened in his personal life, maybe in childhood or something like that, that caused him to overly fixate on lofty ambitions as a way to cope for a lack of self-worth? We're not gonna get any insight into that and just jump straight back into the adventure part of the movie that barely gets the development that it should. The scene isn't terrible or anything like that. I just think for how long it took Kurt Yeager to try and redeem himself, we should have gotten deeper insight into what made him who he is beyond, "I've been exploring a long time, son. It's hard for me to learn anything else. Pass me another cold one." Yeah, that takes me back to Nam. Now that we've discussed the scenes that stuck out to me the most respectively, I'd like to explain how I even got the idea to compare these movies in the first place. If you've seen my previous video analyzing the Hex trailer, you probably remember me tangentially bringing up Strange World towards the end as an example of what happens when a poorly marketed Disney film doesn't stick the landing. Bringing it up in that video is what made me curious about rediscovering why I didn't like the movie when I initially watched it 3 years ago. So I eventually ended up rewatching it to see if there'd be enough for me to say to make a video completely focused on it, and suffice to say I was disappointed. Which is something I illustrated in my Letterboxd review of the film, which you can check out in the description below. That's the best place to see my most immediate, off-the-cuff reactions to the films I watch. So make sure to follow me on there. Again, link in the description if you care enough, I guess. But anyway, once I realized the similarities between this movie and Treasure Planet, and how the former movie tries to tell an expansive story with a familial drama at the core of it, and ends up failing at both categories, while the latter excels in the first one on top of still giving just enough value within the second to where it doesn't feel like an afterthought within the film, that's when I knew I finally had something. Had I not come to that realization, I would have only made this video about Treasure Planet and would have mostly avoided bringing up this cinematic NyQuil supplement of a movie. If you've been enjoying this video so far, make sure to follow my IG at Genius the Great for the quickest updates on new content. Link in the description. Now that all that is out of the way, let's spend the next section fully comparing and contrasting the pros and cons of both of these films. First, let's start with the main character dynamics from both movies respectively, since they're the primary reason this video even exists in the first place. Jim and Silver versus Searcher and Yeager. Jim and Silver have a very tumultuous father-son relationship, right? But instead of the twists and turns feeling forced and contrived like Searcher and Yeager, each bump in the road feels more impactful. Not to mention the vibrant hand-drawn character animation from Disney legends like Glen Keane strengthening the story so much with visual storytelling beyond the film's screenplay that beautifully illustrates the constant back and forth emotions of the overall hesitation that Silver feels throughout this film. By the end of the movie, you come to the realization that Silver basically saw himself in Jim. A bond that he started initially to save face for a grander, selfish plan of his own, ended up fostering into something real so fast. The amount of care and youthful ambition that Jim has for his goals is probably something that Silver had long ago before he became corrupted by his own greed.
If I could maneuver a skiff like that when I was your age, they'd be bowing in the streets when I walk by today.
Bowing in the street.
I don't know. They weren't exactly singing my praises when I left home. But I'm gonna change all that.
Losing a body part chasing a dream is bound to change the way you look at the world.
You give up a few things, chasing a dream.
Was it worth it?
I'm hoping it is, Jimbo.
As he connects deeper with Jim, it brings him to the ultimatum that he jumps back and forth between throughout the film. Should he guide this kid into pursuing his dreams further and not having his light dimmed by his circumstances? Or should he keep his eyes on the world's greatest prize? So when he's given his last chance to pick between these two options, but chooses to save Jim and kill the guy who tried to frame him with the death of Arrow in the first place, the same event that made the bond between them deeper, despite all of Silver's morally gray decisions up until this point, you can't help but root for him when he ultimately makes the right choice. The film's balance between overt and subtle storytelling seamlessly builds an immersive atmosphere around the story. It makes it feel more like a grounded character drama that just so happens to be a bombastic, high-budget adventure film. Ironically, the fact that the movie's sci-fi setting / action-oriented elements aren't as omnipresent or important within the film's core message is one of the main gripes that the late legendary film critic Roger Ebert had in his review of the film, while still enjoying the movie itself. Other critics at the time also felt like Treasure Planet's environmental diversion from the source material was a forced attempt at modernizing the original Treasure Island novel, which I admittedly haven't read yet. I understand where these critiques are coming from, especially if they were huge fans of the source material. But to me, the fact that the movie's MacGuffin is the least interesting aspect of the film doesn't bother me because of how strong its characters are. If anything, I think it being a grounded film with a grandiose visual backdrop and set pieces is one of my favorite aspects of it, which is why I find it ironic that Strange World is structured in a similar way, yet it ends up being way more frustrating to watch, mostly due to how irritating the dynamic between Searcher and Yeager is. And in general, it's just hard to connect to their dynamic emotionally, since Yeager doesn't feel nearly redeemable as they make him out to be for reasons I gave in the previous section. He spends half the movie embarking on Searcher's mission for his own selfish needs, states the obvious about why he abandoned his son in the middle of the film, and is treated like some big brain revelation, only for him to go back to pushing away his son again in the third act. It felt like a forced way to keep the conflict going more than anything that had actual emotional weight behind it.
Dude, oh right, because I'm a horrible father. Yeah, but you didn't have to be.
Now listen, that's called motherfucking bars, nigga. You know nothing about that.
One change I'm glad they made from earlier versions of the movie, according to the DVD's behind the scenes content, link in the description if you want to see that here on YouTube, is them changing the way Yeager abandoned his family. In earlier versions of the film's prologue, there was a deleted scene where instead of Yeager leaving Searcher behind over an argument, he just ups and leaves without his dynamic with Searcher being the key reason. He basically leaves home to go explore for 25 years in the same way that the "my dad went to buy milk and never came back" meme is structured, which definitely removes the little bit of emotional weight that we did get from this conflict in the final movie. Also, since the scene hadn't been fully animated, it has what I assume to be placeholder banjo music in the back with a southern narrator detailing what's happening, which, considering how serious this scene is intended to be, it makes it feel tonally dysfunctional in the most hilarious way.
Still a stone that was left unturned, the great mountain wall that encircles our world. A mystery no other explorer could crack. Yeager swore he'd get past it, but instead, he never came back.
But moving on, one of the main aspects of this conflict is how Searcher accidentally starts to push away Ethan in a similar way to how Yeager treated him during his youth. And ironically, the former dynamic seems much easier to empathize with than the latter. Even though Ethan becoming an adventurer instead of a farmer and abandoning his father is established as a fear Searcher has well before the movie's expedition actually kicks off, him continuing to accidentally push away his son is easier to empathize with given the circumstances of the film. If you spend 25 years dedicating your life to something that you think is going to save the planet, only to find out at the last minute that there's issues with your life's work that you never knew about that could destroy the entire planet if you specifically don't do anything about it, it's bound to cloud your judgment on everything around you. It makes sense to be so laser focused on saving the world so you don't lose the life that you built for yourself and your family. That's why he was so adamant about Ethan staying home and not putting himself in danger.
No.
But Dad!
I will not risk your life. Not now. Not ever.
With that much pressure on you, whatever issues you needed to work through beforehand, including familial ones, are bound to be amplified due to the amount of stress. It doesn't necessarily excuse what he did, but it at least contextualizes it in a way that makes you want to root for him amending the relationship he has with his son. At least compared to his relationship with Yeager, where the only desire I have as a viewer is for these niggas to stop interacting on screen as soon as possible. There's one more aspect of these movies where I think there's a sizable quality gap for both films respectively: their supporting characters. In Treasure Planet, the supporting characters don't get as much of a spotlight as some people would like, but in my opinion, they leave a strong enough impression to where they still feel like essential assets to the film. Starting with Doppler, he probably has the most interesting dynamic with Jim besides Silver. He starts off seeing him as a delinquent who constantly disappoints his mother, but as soon as Jim finds the map for Treasure Planet, and he's able to show how quick thinking and intelligent he is in an environment/situation that calls for it the most, you see Doppler start to warm up to him, even if the movie never fully spotlights that change the way I think it should. But even beyond that dynamic, Doppler is not only a very smart guy, but just a fun character to watch, mainly because he says the funniest shit unintentionally. Like when he reveals his feelings for Captain Amelia by accidentally saying there's a lot he could do for her anatomically. a joke that I'm honestly surprised made its way into a Disney movie even by 2002 standards. Speaking of Amelia, she's probably the most underutilized character in this movie. She's very astute and precisely proper in the verbiage that she uses, as well as overall being a very stern leader. But she doesn't really have that goofy side that Doppler has, which is why they end up butting heads earlier in the film. Despite the fact that she might seem intimidating, you can tell she has a deep love for her crew. And I would have loved to learn more about what experiences guided her into becoming such a strong leader in the first place. The only character that truly sends me over the edge in this film is Ben. His inclusion within the film is important plot-wise because he gives Jim pivotal pieces of information when it comes to the treasure, but his overbearing personality is so animated compared to the relatively grounded nature of this film. He feels like a character that a studio exec would force into a movie to keep kids entertained, especially since he doesn't pop in until the last 40 minutes or so of the film. I feel like the movie already has a solid comic relief character with Morph anyway, who ironically barely has any dialogue. I say for the most part, the supporting characters for the film are fun to watch, even when it feels like they aren't reaching their full potential, which goes to show how strongly engaging the overall story of this movie is. Strange World, on the other hand, though, them niggas might be cooked, not gonna lie. Their supporting cast isn't bad necessarily, but severely lacking. The only character that really sticks out to me is Ethan. Not because he's a super engaging character writing wise. I feel like he's a pretty standard rebellious teen character. Not much to analyze there that I haven't already. I mean, his relationship with Diazo was charming and all, but it's such a small part of the film that I almost forgot to mention it in this section. The main thing that makes him fun to watch is his VA's performance. I don't know how to pronounce Buddy's name, so I'm just gonna put it on screen. Shout out to him. He delivers his lines in a way that gives Ethan's voice this balance between teen angst and youthful optimism. Like, his voice isn't super deep, but it's not super prepubescent sounding either, if that makes sense.
Oh, hey Diazo, how was my weekend? What did I do? Oh, yeah, I just ran through a nightmare tunnel to rescue my dad. No big deal.
The rest of the supporting cast are honestly too boring in one note to even be worth bringing up, besides who I consider to be the movie's most underutilized character. She doesn't get to do much in this film besides piloting a plane and being a mother and wife. But ironically, the scene that would have made her this movie's most interesting character had to be cut due to time constraints. According to the movie's DVD outtakes, one of the film's storyboard artists came up with the backstory of her being a pilot derby racer who had an accident that caused her to be afraid of flying again for years, only to finally drum up the courage to do it again when she needs to help her family for the movie's adventure. One of the people who encouraged her not to doubt herself after doing all this was Callisto, aka the person who recruited Searcher to save the planet, someone we barely see her interact with in the final film. On top of that, Callisto was also there when Meridian's crash first happened, so her reassuring her in the scene ends up being a lot more impactful because of that. Meanwhile, in the final film, there's no indication of them having any history together. One of the only key moments they have together in the final cut is Callisto being a dickhead towards Meridian when she rebels against her orders after she and the rest of the crew try to lock Meridian and her family up after being warned about the true nature of the planet being a living thing, which is one of the stupidest parts of the movie, especially since we never get more information on why the planet is a living thing and the history behind it, and instead we have to focus on this forced conflict. But back to the deleted scene, ironically it would have been more interesting than damn near the entirety of this film, almost to the point I'd rather watch an entire movie about this. I guess technically if they did that, the plot would be similar to Cars 3, but still, I feel like if they were dedicated enough, they can still make the story work despite that. After this next section, the video is going to come to a close. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, check out the playlist in the corner of your screen right now with my best videos for new viewers like you. Subscribe to the channel if you feel up to it. I always forget to tell people to do this, but make sure to hype the video. It would be much appreciated. Now that we've established both movies have their strengths and weaknesses, with the majority of Treasure Planet's strengths coming from its immersive atmosphere and how captivating Jim and Silver's dynamic is, and with Strange World's strengths being few and far between, but not necessarily non-existent, allow me to bring you my final thoughts in the next section for this already long ass video. I did not expect to take 2 weeks to write this video when I initially started working on this, but boy did I learn so much about both of these films in that span of time. Even though it's probably obvious that I was more biased towards Treasure Planet as a film throughout this video, as many grievances as I have with Strange World, I wanted to give it the same amount of research and time critiquing it as I did with Treasure Planet. Regardless of how obvious it is which film I prefer personally, I wanted to paint as three-dimensional of a picture for both as much as possible, looking past my biases at least a little bit to fully understand what each film was aiming to do. As harsh as I was towards Strange World, especially after watching its behind the scenes, I want to commend everybody that worked on this film. The amount of work that went into things like the technology they needed to develop for the living organisms in the movie, as well as them incorporating real-world science into the film, is definitely something worth mentioning, even if the movie didn't land for me as a holistic package. However, what really stood out to me during the scripting process for this video was hearing the team behind Treasure Planet talk about how it took them 17 years to get the film made towards the end of the movie's audio commentary. As somebody who's been trying to make the same indie cartoon for almost 10 years now, it's inspiring to hear firsthand about the amount of determination and tenacity that this crew had for their vision. This movie was pitched around the same time as Little Mermaid and didn't get released until the same year as Lilo and Stitch, yet they still made it happen. It might have not been a success right away, but over time it found its own cult following, with the most notable analysis of the film made by one of my favorite YouTubers, Breadsword, currently sits at over 7 million views. But at the end of the day, regardless of how both of these movies turned out respectively, they both had noble goals beyond box office success, tell larger than life stories. And even if it doesn't work out all the time, I'm always going to be a fan of that. So to close out this video, I'm finally going to play the clip in question where the team behind Treasure Planet talks about the process of getting it greenlit in hopes that it inspires somebody who's watching.
And the intention was, even like when we were, I mean, John and I have been working on this for a long period of time. Even between Little Mermaid and Aladdin, we worked on it a little bit. Between Aladdin and Hercules, we worked on it a little bit. And even then, I mean, we conceived it as a big action adventure movie, and really wanted to get that kind of action adventure cinematics into it, and had no idea how that would be possible. And it turned out that by the time we actually were able to actually do the film, technology had developed that actually made it possible. But even then, a lot of stuff was developed in the course of the movie that didn't exist when we began. And
that's a testament to the team, because the team was really everyone embraced this film, everyone embraced the story, and everyone embraced the technology that was there.
They took it into these uncharted territories, technologically speaking and artistically speaking, in terms of character design, acting choices, virtual sets, 3D, 2D, you name it, all the way down the line. We were doing things we hadn't really done before, and yeah, it was a testament to the team.
Was it worth it?
I'm hoping it is, Jimbo.